The CIA spent $3 billion on a covert war in Afghanistan. It armed fighters, trained networks, built supply lines, and it worked. The Soviet Union was humiliated and withdrew, but one of the men who fought in that war, who built his network inside the infrastructure that American dollars had made possible, didn't go home when it was over. He turned around and he pointed everything he'd built at the country that had helped build it. Osama bin Laden was not born in a cave. He was the 17th son of Mohammed bin Laden, the founder of the Saudi bin Laden Group, one of the largest construction companies in the Middle East, worth billions. He grew up wealthy in Jeddah, studied engineering, and had every reason to live a comfortable life. But in 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. And for a young man raised in a deeply religious environment, the call to defend Muslim land against a godless superpower was irresistible. Bin Laden left Saudi Arabia. He was 22 years old. He went to Pakistan first, then crossed into Afghanistan. He brought something the Mujahideen desperately needed. Not just his willingness to fight, but his family's money and his connections to the wealthiest donors in the Gulf. He arrived as a volunteer. He would leave as something else entirely. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in December of 1979 was a Cold War gift for Washington. The Soviets had walked into a trap, and the CIA had a plan to make it as painful as possible. Operation Cyclone, the CIA's covert program to arm and fund the Afghan Mujahideen, the resistance fighters, without sending a single American soldier. The money flowed from Washington to Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI. The ISI chose which factions received the weapons. The CIA provided the cash. Pakistan decided where it went. The budget started at $20 to $30 million a year. By 1987, it had exploded to $630 million. Saudi Arabia matched every dollar. Over $1 billion a year was pouring into a war the United States was officially not fighting. And into this flood of money, weapons, and chaos walked the 22-year-old son of a Saudi billionaire. The CIA needed fighters. Pakistan needed influence. Saudi Arabia needed a holy war. And a young man from Jeddah needed a purpose. Everybody got what they wanted, for a while. In 1984, bin Laden and the Palestinian cleric Abdullah Azzam founded an organization called Maktab al-Khidamat, the Afghan Services Bureau, known as the MAK. On paper, it was a logistics hub. It recruited young Muslim men from across the Arab world, arranged their travel to Pakistan, and funneled them into training camps along the Afghan border. In practice, it was something much bigger. The MAK became the largest pipeline of foreign fighters into the Afghan war. Thousands of volunteers from over 35 countries passed through it. Bin Laden funded much of it with his family fortune, but he also raised millions from wealthy donors across Saudi Arabia and the Gulf with the knowledge and encouragement of Saudi intelligence. And here's where the story gets uncomfortable. The MAK didn't operate in a vacuum. It operated inside the same ecosystem that the CIA was funding through Pakistan's ISI. The ISI, the CIA's primary partner in the entire war, nurtured the MAK. The training camps where Arab volunteers learned to fight sat in the same border regions that received CIA-funded weapons. The logistics networks, the roads, the supply chains, all of it ran through the same infrastructure that American dollars had built and Pakistani intelligence maintained. Bin Laden didn't need a check from the CIA. He had his own money. But he built his network inside a machine that the CIA's money had made possible. The camps, the routes, the contacts, the recruits, all of it existed because the CIA and the ISI had created the conditions for it to exist. And while the CIA was focused on the Soviets, bin Laden was focused on something bigger. He wasn't just fighting a war, he was building an organization. In 1986, the war changed. Congressman Charlie Wilson, a Texas Democrat who had become the unlikely champion of the Afghan cause, pushed through the delivery of FIM-92 Stinger missiles, portable, shoulder-fired, surface-to-air weapons that a single fighter could operate with minimal training. Before the Stingers, Soviet helicopters dominated the battlefield. After the Stingers, Soviet pilots were forced to fly higher. losing their effectiveness. Roughly 2,300 Stingers were delivered. Soviet aircraft losses climbed. Air superiority, the one advantage the Red Army had, crumbled. On February the 15th, 1989, the last Soviet soldier crossed the Friendship Bridge back into the Soviet Union. 10 years, 15,000 Soviet dead, the Red Army gone. In Washington, champagne was poured. Operation Cyclone had achieved everything it was designed to do. The Soviet Union was bleeding. The Cold War was turning. But nobody in Washington asked the obvious question, what happens now? What happens to the fighters, the weapons, and the networks when the enemy they were built to destroy is gone? Because among those fighters was a Saudi engineer who had just spent a decade building the most effective jihadist recruitment network in the world, and he had no intention of disbanding it. After the Soviet withdrawal, the United States lost interest in Afghanistan almost overnight. The CIA officer who had managed much of Operation Cyclone, Gust Avrakotos, urged his superiors to fund reconstruction, schools, roads, stability. He was ignored. The budget for post-war Afghanistan was essentially zero. $630 million a year to fight a war, nothing to clean up after it. What followed was chaos. The Mujahideen factions that had fought the Soviets together now turned on each other. A brutal civil war consumed the country for years, and from the chaos rose the Taliban, a fundamentalist movement backed by the same Pakistani ISY that had distributed CIA weapons for a decade. By 1996, the Taliban controlled most of Afghanistan, and they offered Osama bin Laden exactly what he needed, a safe base of operations. Because in 1988, while the Soviets were still withdrawing, bin Laden and a small group of associates had already founded a new organization from the remnants of the MAK's infrastructure, the training camps, the recruitment lists, the financial networks, the experienced fighters. They called it Al-Qaeda, in Arabic, the base. The CIA had spent a decade building the base, and now someone else was using it. In 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Bin Laden offered the Saudi royal family his Mujahideen veterans to defend the kingdom. Tens of thousands of battle-hardened fighters, he said, ready to protect Saudi soil without foreign help. The Saudi government said no. Instead, they invited the United States military. Hundreds of thousands of American troops were deployed on Saudi soil, the land of Mecca and Medina, the two holiest sites in Islam. For bin Laden, this was the ultimate betrayal, not just by the Saudi government, but by the United States, the same country that had funded the jihad in Afghanistan and now stationed its soldiers on sacred ground. In his view, America had gone from ally to occupier. In 1992, bin Laden's operatives carried out a bombing in Yemen, targeting American soldiers. In 1996, he issued a public declaration of war against the United States. In 1998, he issued a fatwa calling on Muslims worldwide to kill Americans. That same year, Al-Qaeda bombed the American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing over 200 people. In 2000, Al-Qaeda attacked the USS Cole in Yemen, killing 17 American sailors. Each attack was larger, each one better organized, each one funded, planned, and executed by networks that had been built in the mountains of Afghanistan during a war the CIA had paid for. The man who had fought alongside America's proxy army was now running his own war against America itself. On September the 11th, 2001, the networks, the training camps, the recruitment pipelines, and the operational expertise that had been built during the 1980s were turned against the country that had made them possible. The CIA has a word for this. They invented it themselves: blowback. The unintended consequences of a covert operation that come back to harm the country that launched it. Operation Cyclone is the textbook definition. $3 billion to arm fighters in a country the United States understood poorly through an intermediary it couldn't fully control, with no plan for what came after. The war was won, the aftermath was lost, and the cost of that aftermath was measured not in dollars, but in lives.